Since this module focuses on technology, I wanted to talk to you about a piece of technology that I discovered recently in Blackboard. It's the self and peer assessment tool that's available in the content area of your course under the assessments options. Before you can use it though, you need to make sure that it's turned on in all areas of your course. To do that, you just scroll down to the customization button in the course management control panel and click that to open it up and select tool availability, which is the bottom option in that group. And that'll open up the tool availability screen, which is an alphabetical listing of all the tools in Blackboard. Scroll all the way down until you find self and peer assessment, and just make sure that that has a check mark in the box under available. Blackboard's self and peer assessment allows students to review, evaluate, and reflect on other students' work. What that means is you can expect your students to write a paper, but maybe you want them to get some feedback from others before they actually submit it to you for a grade. So you can ask them to write the introduction of the paper and then submit that through the self and peer assessment tool. You can set it up so that they are required to do a self-assessment, they evaluate their own paper, but then also they might be evaluating two of their peers' papers. You can provide a rubric that your students will use and scoring guidelines, and you can also provide models of exemplary work that they could be looking at as examples of what they're supposed to be seeing in the other students' work. This is going to help them grow as learners and be able to provide the kind of work that you're expecting. To get started with the self and peer assessment in Blackboard, you'll go to your coursework area and then select the modular folder where you want the self and peer assessment to be located. Click on the assessment button at the top of your window and then select the self and peer assessment option. This opens up a self and peer assessment window that allows you to create or import a self-assessment for your course. If you have one in another course, you can import it, but for our purposes here, we're just going to create a new one. Under assessment information, you'll enter the name that you want your students to see for this particular self and peer assessment. There's also a place for you to put instructions. Now this is different from the criteria that your students will be using for scoring their self and peer evaluations. You'll put something like submit your introduction here by September 22nd, and then come back during the evaluation period and evaluate your work and the work of two of your peers by October 2nd. Under submission dates, you'll enter the date range where your students will be able to submit their work for review by their peers. Under the evaluation date, you'll enter another date range where your students will come back after they've submitted their work and evaluate the work of their peers. The start date under evaluation dates does have to be after the end date of the submission date, so make sure you accommodate for plenty of time to allow your students to get their submissions in and their feedback returned from their peers before going on to the next step of the project. Under options, you can also change the settings to allow or disallow anonymous evaluation. The default is that anonymous evaluation is turned on, and so what your students see when they go into to review their peers' work is user 1, user 2, and so on. The default for self-evaluation is also set to yes, so your students would be required to do a self-evaluation, but you can change that to no if you want. And then you can also change the number of submissions for each to evaluate. Click Submit to load what's called the assessment canvas. On the assessment canvas, you'll enter a question that your students will respond to by uploading their work or by typing a response in a text box. Whatever they submit is what their peers will be evaluating and what they'll evaluate on themselves if you chose to do a self-evaluation. And this is where the question itself goes. So you might put something like, submit a rough draft of your work here. You've also got an option to add a model response. The model response is going to be an example of exemplary student work that you might be expecting from your students. This can serve as a model for the peers when they're reviewing the work of the other students. After adding your question or questions, it's time to add criteria, so your students will know what they're evaluating each other on. Return to the assessment canvas, and next to each question you'll see a menu button appear as you mouse over it. Select criteria from the menu that appears. In the Add Edit Criteria window, click Create Criteria. You can also use a word count criteria. When you add criteria, think about it kind of like a rubric for your students to use when they're evaluating the work of their peers or themselves. You'll add criteria elements and what the students need to be looking for, and then any points possible for that criterion. You can also allow the students to award partial credit if maybe they think the student was on the verge of getting it right but not quite there. And then there's also an option to allow the peers to provide feedback to each other. The default here is yes, so make sure that you leave it yes if you want your students to see feedback from their peers. Make sure you click submit when you're finished and you're done, you're ready to go. Students will access the peer or self-evaluation by going to their coursework area, and then they can click on the name of the assessment or view complete assessment to actually access it. When students view the Take Assessment screen, they'll see the title of the assessment that they're going to be working on, and then there's some other information that the instructor provides, including the number of peer evaluations they're required to do and if they're required to do a self-evaluation. Status not complete here shows the students that they haven't submitted anything yet. Once they've submitted, they'll see completed. To submit an assignment for review or evaluation, the student will click on the question number or question title. To submit work for review, the students can type a response in the response box, or to attach a file, they can click Browse My Computer, locate the file on their computer, and then attach it. Using the Browse My Computer option, students can attach a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, a video file, an audio file, an image file. Basically any kind of electronic digital media can be attached. Once submitted, the status here changes to completed, so the student knows that their work has been attached. When the evaluation period opens, the students should return to the self and peer assessment and evaluate their peers and their own work if required to do so. To get started with the assessment process, the students should click View Complete Assessment. Students will see a link to their own work, the work of their peers, the status of each, and the points allocated for each work. Students will read and evaluate the submission of their peers and download any attached media to also assess and review. Students should review each criterion provided by their instructor and determine if the peer that they're reviewing met that criteria. They can put feedback in the Feedback to Learner box and then allocate points accordingly. Students will click Save and Next Criteria to move through the next, and then Save and Submit to submit their final assessment. After completing all of their self and peer evaluations, the students will be returned to an evaluation overview page. Here, students will see the peers that they reviewed, the status of their reviews, and then points allocated for each. To view or download the results, or to add everything to your Grade Center, you'll need to go to the Self and Peer Assessment button under Course Tools in the Course Management Control panel on the left-hand side of your screen. This provides a list of all of the self and peer assessments you have in your course. You can mouse over the name of each to access a menu that will allow you to view results, download the results, view submissions, and even send grades to Grade Center.